Welcome to another virtual Live Talks Los Angeles event. We welcome Admiral William McRaven and Mark Harmon to our series. We invite you to visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel for over 300 conversations. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Our handle at all three is Live Talks LA. Admiral McRaven's book is The Hero Code: Lessons Learned from Lives Well Lived. He is the New York Times bestselling author of Make Your Bed and Sea Stories: My Life in Special Operations. In his 37 years as a Navy SEAL, he commanded at every level. As a four-star admiral, his final assignment was as commander of all U.S. Special Operations Forces. After retiring from the Navy, he served as the Chancellor of the University of Texas system from 2015 through 2018. Mark Harmon is an actor, producer, director, voice actor, and former football quarterback. He is best known for playing the lead role of Leroy Jethro Gibbs in NCIS. I am Ted Haptegabber, founder and producer of the series. They will talk, and towards the end, I will pose some questions that came from you in the audience. Take it from here, Mark.
Bill, this is going to be easy for me because I'm such a fan. It's an honor to sit here opposite you, and I was one of those individuals in 2014 who saw your Texas commencement speech, and then 3 years later happened to read Make Your Bed, and then 3 years after that, Sea Stories, all bestsellers, and then now today I have the opportunity to be talking to you about your new one.
Thanks.
Which I have read and thoroughly enjoyed. I'm so intrigued by you as a storyteller, and I'm curious about the name, The Hero Code. Where's that come from?
Well, first, thanks, Mark, for taking the time to do this. I appreciate it. And, this idea of telling stories kind of resonated with me from the time I was a kid. My father was an Air Force fighter pilot during World War II, a little bit of time in Korea. And I think that generation, that greatest generation, really understood how to tell stories. And they told stories because I think it helped them deal with, the challenges that they had as a generation in life. I mean, you think about that generation who were the children of World War I and the Depression, and then all the men went off to World War II. And so they had to kind of use these stories, I think, to get over those tough times in life. And so I think as I watched my parents talk about the things that they had done in life and tell stories, my father in particular, you kind of picked that up. But I would offer for the Hero Code, this is a little bit about society. I mean, society needs heroes. I mean, every society, every culture needs heroes so that it will inspire the younger generation to be better than the current generation. So in my 40 years, 37 in the military, and then a little over 3 years running the University of Texas system, man, I had a chance to be around a lot of heroes. So this book is about the qualities, the traits, the virtues of some of these heroes that I've encountered in my lifetime. And I hope that particularly this young generation, the millennials and the Gen Z, of which I am their biggest fan, I hope they will take a look at these stories and take them to heart and realize that everybody today can be a hero, and man, we need heroes.
Were you at all concerned, your experience in the military, then you're going into a private practice of sorts, right, that you wouldn't find those same individuals?
Yeah, I was a little bit. I mean, I came from, spending time with these remarkable soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines. You saw them in combat, in my case, from Desert Storm, and then Iraq and Afghanistan. And of course, it wasn't just the soldiers, the remarkable civilians that were part of the intelligence community and the law enforcement community. And then the next thing, I'm the Chancellor of the University of Texas, and now I'm with a bunch of academics and students and doctors, and I thought, it's just not going to be the same. But it was. I mean, remarkable heroes everywhere I looked in my time as the Chancellor. I watched the state of Texas go through Hurricane Harvey, and you saw, men and women of all races, genders, orientations step up to help their fellow neighbors. I mean, I've watched, young kids going to school in the Rio Grande Valley and Permian Basin and El Paso and Austin, trying to make a better life for themselves. You meet these remarkable doctors, state legislators that are trying to do things for the state. So there are a lot of heroes out there. And for me, it was great to have this opportunity to make the transition and come away inspired by the fact that a lot more heroes out there than I think I realized from just being in the military.
Well, these individual stories that you have talked about since 2014 in your life, the way you turn that so interests me, because I can learn so much from you for sure. But I find that you have an ability to teach in what you are writing about, but at the same time, you are doing things that not normal people do, Bill. You are. I mean, I can think of so many stories, and that's part of reading your books. I find myself telling other people what I've just read that you wrote, because something they've said is something that keys something that you've made a point of, and that's true in this book, because you have these 10 virtues that you've done chapter headings with, and I see that as such a guide, right. And it reminds me so much of a man I knew earlier on in my life that was a remarkable teacher for me, and I think you have that same gift.
Well, thanks. And part of it is, when you have an opportunity to be, again, to encounter these remarkable men and women that I have, invariably it's at kind of dramatic moments, and those dramatic moments become teaching points. I talk about the story when I was in Dallas a few years back, sitting at a table with Roger Staubach, a Hall of Famer from the Dallas Cowboys, and I'm going around the table kind of introducing myself, and I meet this elderly couple, and he introduces himself as Charlie, and I didn't catch his last name. And so as the dinner goes on, Charlie and his wife Dottie, and we talk for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and Charlie is just incredibly gracious, and all he wants to talk about is me and my family. And he wants to know about my son in the Air Force, because Charlie had been in the Air Force. And he wants to know about my wife, and he's just a wonderful fella. And when the dinner's over, he invites me to come down to his home in New Braunfels, and I said I appreciate the invitation. But as I'm leaving, Roger Staubach comes up to me and he says, I see you were talking to Charlie. And I said, yeah, and, very nice guy. And he goes, man, can you imagine what that must have been like? I said, what are you talking about, Roger? He goes, just imagine. Imagine what? Imagine walking on the moon. I said, I'm sorry, what are you talking about? He goes, Charlie Duke. He was the youngest man ever to walk on the moon. And of course, then it hit me. Of course, General Charles Duke, the youngest man ever to walk on the moon. And never in that hour and a half that we talked did he happen to mention that he walked on the moon. And as I began to read the story of Charlie Duke, you find out that he wasn't always humble. It's when you're kind of a fighter pilot and you're the youngest man ever to walk on the moon, all of a sudden the burden of the notoriety and the celebrity comes. But his wife Dottie became a Christian. He quickly kind of followed that path, and it was his humility that, to me, was this kind of noble quality, this heroic quality that you don't often see in people that happen to have walked on the moon. So I do think it's these dramatic events, these dramatic moments that really become kind of teaching moments, certainly teaching moments for me.
Some of these stories are, I find, intensely personal for you.
Yeah.
You have a chapter heading Hope.
Yeah.
You talk about personal issues, personal fights,
right.
Personal no-quit moments.
Yeah, so the chapter on Hope, in 2010, I was over in Afghanistan, and I received a video call from my doctor, and she informed me that I had chronic lymphocytic leukemia, cancer. Now, they told me at the time, look, if you got to get cancer, this is one of the better ones to get. It's treatable, but it's in the spleen, it's splenic marginal zone, and the protocol at the time was to come back, get your spleen taken out, start on chemotherapy, and the doctor basically said, look, you're probably not going to be able to continue in the military with the way you're going to have to take care of this treatment. Well, that's a pretty big blow, and I struggled with it for a while. Well, I left Afghanistan, went back to the States, kind of preparing and fully expecting that I was going to have to undergo some major surgery and start chemotherapy. And my wife, God bless her, said, hey, we're going to go to MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston because the world's best oncologist on CLL is there in Houston. So we traveled down to Houston to MD Anderson. And I remember, as everybody who has had a tough diagnosis, I'm walking through the hospital, and as you're walking through the ward, the kind of cancer ward, you see the people that are struggling with this horrible disease in many different ways, and it scares you. I remember walking into the doctor's office, and it's kind of your standard, small white office, and I'm sitting there, and you're wondering, what's the doctor going to tell you? Is this going to be kind of a life sentence? And all of a sudden, the door flies open. And in walks this kind of ruddy-faced Australian fella, and he looks at me and he goes, hey, give me a hug. I'm not a hugger. And I said, okay. So give the guy a big hug, and he turns to Georgianne, and he says, so you the wife? Georgianne kind of nods, and she goes, and he says, well, if you were looking for a new boyfriend, you can stop. He's going to be okay. And of course, I had to pause for a second. I said, I'm sorry, Doc, what? He goes, you're going to be fine. I'm sorry, the prognosis I had gotten earlier, he says, well, the prognosis was right, but we've got new medicine, and you're going to be just fine. And my wife, Georgianne, finally turns to him, and she says, well, should he eat more fruits and vegetables? And he goes, no, I don't think so. She says, well, should he exercise more? Kind of looks at me and says, no, he looks like he's in pretty good shape. And finally she says, well, should he cut back on his alcohol? And all of a sudden he gets back up out of his chair, kind of feigns this expression. He goes, oh God, no! And all of a sudden the tension just kind of went down. And we talked through, the effects of CLL and how I was going to have to deal with them. But all of a sudden he gave me hope that, doggone it, there's hope out there. Life can be okay. And you just realize the power of hope that's out there. And so, part of what I want people to take away from that story is that everybody has the opportunity to give people hope. You don't just give them false hope. Everybody has a talent. I mean, everybody has a talent. Some people are smarter, stronger, braver, more compassionate. You've got a talent out there, and you have to use that talent to give people hope. And that really is, I think, what makes certain people heroic. It certainly was, I thought he was heroic for me.
It's commendable and revealing of yourself to tell that story. At the same time, it's humor that turns it for you.
Yeah.
And you talk about that as well. Humor is important.
Yeah, I think humor is one of those very undervalued noble qualities. And when we talk about heroes, the kind of standard definition is you admire heroes because of their noble qualities, not just because of their achievements, but because of their noble qualities. We don't think of humor really as a noble quality until you see it in the hospitals in Iraq and Afghanistan, where these young soldiers have lost legs and lost arms, and they're able to laugh about it. And of course, it's I can't tell you how many times I would go in and I'd see some young soldier who'd been hit by a blast or lost a leg, and I'd make some kind of funny comment about, man, you look like crap. And of course, the quick response was, yeah, but you should see the other guy. And it was a standard response, but it was also a way for them to say, they didn't beat me. And so humor became not only a shield, but a sword. But also I saw humor used so many times in all the eulogies of the services of our fallen heroes. And the services were best when somebody would get up and tell a funny story about the fallen warrior. And a funny story that kind of played on the fact that they had a good life. It may not have ended the way you wanted it to, but they had a fun life, they had a happy life, they were funny, they had a sense of humor, life was good. And being able to find that humor in tough moments like that, man, that's true heroism. That is a noble quality.
You mentioned in that chapter as well. You just joining the teams,
Right.
as a young frogman, and I don't want to get any of this wrong, and I don't want to offend any SEALs, but there's a moment you talk about with
Right.
a less than tall Italian SEAL who you have a little play
Back and forth with, you bet. Yeah, so it was either the first or second day that I arrived at what was referred to as Underwater Demolition Team 11. And we all became SEAL teams not too long after that. But you know, I'm a young ensign. I've just come out of SEAL training. I don't even have my SEAL trident yet. It was normally 6 months after SEAL training. And I had met with the executive officer of the team. And every single morning at a SEAL team, you have morning PT, morning physical training. And you have officers called, and you have everybody kind of musters, and then they quickly fall out into a circle on what we refer to as the grinder. It's a concrete pad, basically. And everybody gets around the circle, and you start your PT. But it is on the grinder where you are tested every single day. I mean, it is a constant roasting by whoever is there. And so my first day on, I remember the executive officer, as we're kind of walking out to start our morning PT, he says, he welcomes me and he says, "Oh yeah," he says, the chiefs, they're gonna love you. They're wonderful. They're gonna take good care of you. You know, you're gonna be welcomed with open arms. But I could tell he had a little twinkle in his eye, and I knew something was up. So we get into the grinder and we start PTing, and I mean, as soon as we start, it starts. You know, one of the chiefs says, "So, Ensign, where'd you go to school? I heard you went to Texas A&M." And of course, I went to the University of Texas, and as you well know, a little bit of a rivalry there. And I said, no, Chief, I went to the University of Texas. And some other guy says, "Well, that's not a real school," and before long, they're assaulting my school, and then they wanted to know what training class I was in. Well, I was in class 95, but of course, that was the easiest class in the history of SEAL training. And then the rather diminutive Italian fellow, Chief Petty Officer, Senior Chief Petty Officer, who I knew was a highly decorated Vietnam vet, starts asking me about, "Well, do you have a girl?" I said, "Yeah, Chief, I do." And he says, "Well, tell me about her." I said, she's beautiful, cute, little brunette, And he says, "Well, do you think she'd like a swarthy Italian?" And I'm thinking, oh, here's my opening, because he was kind of a small guy. And I said, "Well, I don't know, Chief." I said, "She generally likes men that are taller than she is." All of a sudden, the whole PT circle goes quiet. And the chief kind of bows up, and he kind of walks over to me. And of course, I'm 6'2", he comes up to about here, and he says, "I'm sorry, Ensign, are you making fun of my height?" And I can look at the guys in the PT circle, they're like, "Oh, for God's sake, don't go there. He's really sensitive about his height." And of course, I'm thinking, maybe I went a little too far here. And he's looking up at me, and he's kind of growling at me. And the only thing I could think to say was, "Well, Chief, you are looking up at me." And of course, he goes through this kind of mock anger, and then all of a sudden, a big grin comes across his face, and he goes, "That's good. That's good. Welcome to the teams." But every day in the teams, you'd get around that circle, and I don't care whether you were the commanding officer or the lowest ranking, seaman apprentice, you were going to get harassed. And it was important for both team morale. But, if you thought you had done something great the day before, rest assured they were not going to let you have a big head, because they were going to kind of cut you down to size. And conversely, if you'd had a bad day, they knew how to kind of lift you up with the humor as well. And you found this ability on the PT grinder to learn to laugh at yourself, and then to find ways to use that humor to help other people. And I think it was one of the greatest experiences in being a SEAL, was that morning PT, on the asphalt grinder.
Give it back to him.
Yeah, that's right. that's the only thing you can do.
I have a favorite chapter, duty. Your chapter on duty, Airman Jackson and John McCain.
Yeah.
And that's a story I've told already, and it has an interesting parallel too. Certainly your time with John, and also in a different way, your own time with Airman Jackson.
So the story about duty, to your point, Mark, there's kind of two contrasting stories there. The first story I tell is about, I don't know if it was the first time, but it was certainly my first time as a senior officer meeting with John McCain. And I went to the Senate office, and I was getting ready to be confirmed for 4 stars. And part of the normal process is, you go meet with the senators that are on in this case, the Senate Armed Services Committee. And so I go in to see, Senator John McCain. And of course, being a naval officer, Senator John McCain is one of the truly great American heroes. And so I go in, he comes out to meet me, and he's very gregarious, shakes my hand, we come into his office, and of course I'm thinking about this remarkable story of when he was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And McCain had the opportunity to get out of the POW camp. The North Vietnamese were going to let him go if they wanted to let him go so that they could show favoritism because John McCain's father was an admiral. Right. And they wanted to break the morale of the other POWs by, giving somebody else a favor by letting them go. And McCain refused their offer to leave the POW camp. Why? Because the military code of conduct says that if you're a prisoner of war, you will not take any favors, any exceptional treatment from your captors. I mean, can you imagine? You are in there. He'd been in there for 3 or 4 years at that point in time. He had been tortured and brutalized. Here you have an opportunity to leave, and he didn't. I mean, that's the highest end of doing your duty. But I remember as we were leaving that day, McCain thanks me for my service. I was just stunned, both at his humility and also at recognizing the character of the man. But my point in the story about duty is it's not always about these incredible, sacrifices and duties of a John McCain. And so the other end of the story was when I was in Afghanistan. It was probably 2010. President Barack Obama had come to Afghanistan to meet with Hamid Karzai, the president of Afghanistan. And the Air Force One had flown into Bagram Air Base, which is where my base was. And then the president was going to get on a couple of helicopters and fly from Bagram about an hour into Kabul. Well, the weather came in, and he was unable to make the flight. So the next thing I know, the general who is in charge of his visit calls my office and says, "Look, we got to do something. We got the president here. We need you to come over and brief the president, and you need to be here within 20 minutes." And I was actually in the gym working out, and I was like, "Okay, I think I can make this." So I told my aide de camp, I said, "Get a couple copies of the brief." I changed clothes real quick. We get to the convoy. I got a 2-car convoy, and all I have to do is go across the main road to the airfield and get through the gate and get to the hangar where the president is. Easy drive. So we get in the convoy. I'm looking down at my watch, got about 10 minutes left. Figure I'm going to be fine. So as we cross the main road, we get to the airfield at the back gate, and there's a gate guard there. Young woman, petite young woman, guarding the gate. And so the sergeant gets out of the vehicle, and I'm kind of watching from the back seat, and I see him as he gets out, and he towers over this young woman. And I can see, he starts off and he's kind of calm. And then before long, he's like tapping his watch, and he's pointing to the hangar, and he's waving his arms. She's not budging. And he comes storming back, and he rolls down the window, and he says, "Sir, she won't let us in. She has orders that nobody is supposed to get past here unless they're on the list, and we're not on the list." And my sergeant major, the senior NCO, says, "Sir, I got this." So he gets out of the car, he goes to the woman, and I'm watching from the back, same thing. I can see he's calm at first, and then all of a sudden he's tapping his watch, he's pointing at the hangar, he's waving his arms. She ain't budging. Sergeant Major comes back and goes, "Sir, she is not going to let us through." And of course, I'm thinking, I'm a 3-star admiral. So I get out of the car, I said, "All right, I got this." So I get out of the car, and I kind of calmly walk up, and I look down, and name tag says Jackson on it, and so I said, "Airman Jackson, I'm Admiral McRaven. You can see I'm not a bad guy, but I'm supposed to be briefing the President of the United States right this very minute. You need to kind of let us through." She kind of takes a deep breath, and I can tell she's scared. I'm towering over. I got 3 stars looking at her in her eyes, and she says, "Well, sir, you're not on the list. And my orders are pretty clear. Unless you're on the list, nobody gets past this gate. I took a deep breath and I said, how long do you think that will take? She said, sir, I've asked my sergeant. As soon as I know, I'll let you know. So I walk back to the car and I get in and we wait. Finally, about 10 minutes goes by and gate comes up and we drive through. And I go brief the president. The president never even asked me why I'm late. But as I'm on my way back, we come back through the same gate. And I told the convoy, I said, hold up a second, pull over. So we pull over, I get out of the back seat of the car, and I go up to Airman Jackson. And I looked her in the eye and I said, Airman Jackson, do you know that I was 10 minutes late briefing the President of the United States? And she's shaking a little bit, and she says, yes, sir. I said, 10 minutes late. And do you know when my sergeant came up here, and you wouldn't let us through? My sergeant major came up here, and you wouldn't let us through. And I came up here, and I'm a damn 3-star admiral, and you wouldn't let us through. And she said, yes, sir. I said, you can come work for me anytime. You did exactly what you should be doing. And I reached in my pocket and I pulled out a challenge coin, which commanders only give to soldiers when they do excellent work. And I always remember her response. She said, sir, I was just doing my duty. And the point of the story isn't that she was blindly doing her duty. The fact of the matter is, if she hadn't protected that gate, then what if I wasn't who I said I was? She was part of the cog. There was a sergeant that was over in charge of her, and there was a captain over the sergeant, there was a colonel over the captain, and there was a general over the colonels. And it really is about this, if you've got a job to do your job. In the military, we have this thing called General Order Number 1. General Order Number 1. And it's a very simple order. It says, I'm in charge of my post and everything within view. But I think General Order Number 1 has a much bigger meaning to it. It means that, yes, you're responsible for the job you do and for the things that immediately affect the people around you. It's about doing your duty. I don't care whether your duty is flipping hamburgers at McDonald's, or whether it is guarding your gate, or whether it is taking care of the elderly, or whether it is taking your kids to school. Whatever your duty is, do it to the best of your ability. That is a noble virtue to have.
The great part of that story for me is you getting out of the car on the way out. That's what makes you you.
Well,
You've done that a lot, Bill. You have to. It doesn't just happen. And my point is it's a different story if it's just someone trying to do their duty and you're late and you get in and no one mentions you're late. It's a very different story that you took the time and made the effort to let that person know.
But it is, as I mentioned earlier, it is about the dramatic moments that are the lessons. I mean, I kept thinking back, this was a young airman. She is almost the lowest enlisted rank out there, and she held her ground against the sergeant major, and the 3-star admiral. That's pretty remarkable. That's something that's worth thanking her for.
You talk in one of the chapters about integrity and being in the Pentagon.
Right.
And learning about that, please.
Yeah, so I think I start the story off by saying, look, not all the lessons I learned were, on the battlefields in Iraq and Afghanistan and challenging places. This was one of my first days on the job in the Pentagon. And I worked for a Navy captain named Ted Grabowski, Navy SEAL. And we were having a meeting with the 3-star Admiral about our budget. So it was just a budget meeting. And I'm the slide guy, and of course this was the day when you had view graphs. This was 1986. And so I'm supposed to meet Captain Grabowski in the briefing room, so I rush in with the briefing room, and I've got this stack of slides, and he's going through the slide. Well, the Admiral shows up, and we begin the briefing. Well, I know enough about briefings that, if you're briefing the budget, and you have told people this is how much money we need, you don't come off that number, because the implication is, well, then you haven't done your homework. So as we're talking, the 3-star Admiral, a guy named Admiral Metcalf, who was a salty old, Vietnam vet, and kind of crusty, hard-nosed Admiral, and he's talking to Captain Grabowski, and he goes, Ted, I just don't understand. Do we have to have this? Do we have to have this much ammunition? Do you have to have these number of mini subs? And of course, I'm thinking to myself, well, Grabowski's going to hold the line. He's going to tell the Admiral there is absolutely no way we can't do without this. And all of a sudden Grabowski says, sir, I think you're right. I don't think we need that much ammunition, and I don't think we need as many little mini subs as you're asking for. And I remember looking at the bean counters, the accountants that are over there, and they're kind of like, well, this is kind of a different approach. And so Metcalf said, okay, if you can make those cuts, then you can keep your budget. And this was at a time when we as SEALs post-Vietnam, we were struggling. I'm not sure we had much of a future if we didn't have a good budget. And I came up to Captain Grabowski afterwards. I said, sir, I don't understand. Well, we just lost millions of dollars. He goes, Bill, this was a success. I said, how is that possible? He said, because one, the accountants probably knew we could probably absorb these cuts. And he said, let me tell you what my golden rule here is in the Pentagon. Never lie or misrepresent the truth. Because if you lie or misrepresent the truth, you will be caught. And then people will no longer trust you. And if they don't trust you, you are no longer of any value to me. And it was this relationship between honesty and trust and being able to do things on a small scale and a large scale that really I took to heart. We all know it's not good to lie, but there's this kind of subtleness of misrepresenting the truth that I think is almost as egregious. And so I always tried to approach the rest of my military career recognizing that, of course, you never want to mislead anyone, but also recognizing that if you mislead somebody, not just with a lie, but mislead or misrepresent the truth, then they may no longer trust you. And if they no longer trust you, they will no longer trust you with their relationships. They won't trust you with their money. They won't trust you with their business. They won't trust you with their lives. And if you're a leader and you don't have the trust of your men and women, you're not going to do very well. So it was a great lesson for me at a very young age.
Compassion. And you learned something from an actor.
I did. I did that. Yeah, this was, again, the kind of dramatic moments for me. So this was, I think, 2006. I'm a one-star admiral. I'm in Afghanistan, and we are meeting with General John Abizaid. And General Abizaid was the four-star general. He was in charge of both Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And he had come to Afghanistan, and we were talking important, strategic, really things that were going to affect the war in Afghanistan with all the generals and the admirals. And I'm the only admiral in the room. And we're having dinner in the chow hall in a separate room as all this conversation is taking place. And as we're sitting there, I see the door open up, and the general's aide comes in with a civilian. And kind of think it looks interesting. And the civilian looks around the room, and he's clearly shocked to be walking into a room full of generals. And he looks around, and he says, kind of blurts out, he says, well, who's in charge here? And of course, all of us thought that was pretty funny because we knew exactly who was in charge. And General Abizaid had a little smile on his face, and he says, I guess I am. So the civilian walks up to the front of the table and introduces himself to General Abizaid and says, well, I'm Gary Sinise. I'm an actor. And of course, we're all trying to process this. And he said, I played Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump. And I could see guys like, oh, that was good. You were good in that role. And so he starts talking to General Abizaid. He says, sir, I'm here because I'm trying to deliver school supplies to some Afghan kids. I remember Abizaid having that look like, I'm sorry, you do know we're in the middle of a war here. And Gary says, yes, sir, but if we don't get school supplies to these kids, they're going to lose a year or two of education, and we're not going to be taking care of them in a way that will be meaningful for the country of Afghanistan. And it was interesting to see the room and the change in the posture of the generals in the room. And I say in the chapter that it is easy to get jaded in war. And particularly when you're a warrior, you don't want to have to bleed for every kind of dying soul. You don't want to let your guard down because you think it will make you weak as a warrior. And when you do that, sometimes you can lose your humanity. But when all of a sudden somebody comes forward and you see what a Gary Sinise did that night, but not just that night, as I mentioned in the book, how many times have I seen Gary at Walter Reed and Bethesda showing up to To give young soldiers a pat on the back to thank them for what they've done without any fanfare. But that night in particular, you could see the room change. There was this really good feeling that came over all of us to know that there were people out there that were doing good, and that we could help them do good by getting them a C-130 to be able to deliver the supplies, which General Abzade did. But I remembered that night finally. I've had the opportunity since then to get to know Gary very well, and he is a remarkable, as you well know, a remarkable guy, and just does so much for the military, again, with very little fanfare.
Well, thank God he was good in that role.
Yes, and he was good in that role.
You talk in the preface of this book, Bill. They're young memories.
Yeah.
And you talk about a wonderful moment when you're in New York with your dad and looking up.
So
why are you looking up?
Yeah. So when I was about 3 or 4 years old, my father got stationed in France, and of course we had no television in France at the time, and I read comic books. And I mean, I read all the comic books, but the comic book that fascinated me most was Superman. And I mean, Superman was this incredible hero, from Middle America, Kansas, red, white, and blue, and kind of everything that a young boy my age kind of dreamed of being. And Superman, I mean, he fought all the bad guys. I mean, of course, this was at a time when there were stories of Superman who had fought the Nazis, and now Superman was, fighting the aliens, and Superman was fighting criminals. Well, when we left France, I was about 8 years old, and we sailed across the Atlantic on the SS United States, and we came into New York City. And so this was 1963, and my mother and 2 sisters went off to see a play or something. My dad and I were left, but I'm in the hotel room, and I'm seeing Superman on TV in glorious kind of black and white. And I'm thinking, wow. And of course, I realized that I'm in Metropolis. I mean, New York is Metropolis, right?
Right there, yeah.
So later that day, my dad takes me out, and we're going to go hit all the sites. But while I'm walking through these massive canyons of skyscrapers in New York City, I kind of keep looking up. And again, I'm 8 years old. I know that Superman isn't real, I think, but I'm still kind of hoping that maybe I'll just catch a glimpse of this kind of red cape bouncing around. And as I keep looking up, finally, my dad turns to me and he says, "Bill, what are you looking for?" And I said, "Nothing, Dad." And he kept giving me a little fatherly push. He said, "Why do you keep looking up?" Finally, I said, "Well, I was hoping maybe I'd see Superman." And he pauses, and he looks over, and there's a cop standing in the corner. And he says, "Son, that's the man that protects New York City." And it was an epiphany for me. I mean, it was one of these recognitions that, yeah, I know Superman's not real. But if Superman's not real, who's going to solve the problems of the world? Who's going to take care of the bad guys? Who's going to help us through the tough times? Who's going to take care of the struggling men and women and children? And of course, the epiphany was, we are. We're going to have to do that. And I became kind of fascinated with these heroes. Of course, this was at a time when the astronauts were looking to go to the moon, and I loved these men that were part of the right stuff, but it was just, there seemed to be heroes when I looked around. But of course, I knew I couldn't be a hero. There was no way. I was never going to be as brave as the astronauts, or as compassionate as some of these other people, or as dutiful as a John McCain. There was just no way. But you realize you can learn these traits, you can learn these qualities, you can learn these virtues. And that's really kind of the focus of the book, is recognizing that this generation of millennials and Gen Z and even older folks like us, in particular the millennials and the Gen Zs, they are going to be the heroes of this century. And we need them to be the heroes. And I'm hoping some of these stories will inspire them in that direction. Well,
you've been inspired, and I I don't know about your mom and dad, but I know enough to say they were remarkable people.
There were.
And they'd be, or are so proud of you. Your interpretation of the teaching of lesson of what you've learned in your time is, it's fortunate for people like me to be an audience to that, to be able to read that, to be able to remember that, to be able to interpret that. This is the first time you and I have met actually in person here today, but I've admired you for a long time, and that is pretty much from afar, as it should be. But you have so much to say, and I think this will be your third bestseller, and I hope that you keep writing, and I hope that you keep bringing this to the public. You have so much to give.
Thank you very much, Mark. Appreciate it.
I guess we have some questions
Good
from
time.
the audience. Okay. Yeah, very.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Admiral McRaven. We have several questions from our audience. The first one is, we make the assumption that a heroic act determines a hero. Is that a mistake?
No, I don't think that's a mistake. If, again, you characterize a heroic act as a noble act. Where I think sometimes people get confused is they see achievement or accomplishment as doing something heroic. So, you may be a great athlete, a great entertainer, a great military officer. That doesn't necessarily make you heroic, your achievements. It's what you had to overcome. It's your perseverance to become a great athlete, or it's your humility to become a great doctor, or it is your sense of duty that made you a great military officer. So it is a recognition that a heroic act is absolutely how we define heroes, but be careful about how we look at this idea of a hero. It's not just accomplishments, it is these noble acts that make something heroic.
There's another related question. Lady asks the difference between idols and heroes and our tendency in social media and popular culture to idolize sports figures and celebrities and look up to them as heroes.
Yeah, so kind of back to the previous question. I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at certain athletes, sports figures, and actors and others as heroes. But it's not because they, scored 45 points in a game. That's not what made them the hero. What made them the hero is the fact that before they could even get to the NBA, the NFL, they had to persevere. They had to overcome something. That's the heroic act. The word idol, of course, is, to me, I don't know that you idolize people, and I don't like that particular term, because if you put somebody up on a pedestal, they're going to fall off it. Heroes, they're not all perfect. There are some noble qualities that heroes have, but we all have these flaws. And I would offer that the heroes are the ones that kind of overcome those struggles, overcome those flaws to do something noble.
A question for gentlemen says, teachers are not often held up with the esteem as others as heroes. Can you talk about some of your teachers who were heroes to you?
Oh, well, I would offer, and you're talking to the right guy, because I've always put heroes, with teachers up there as heroes, always have. My mother was a teacher. My sister was a teacher. Watching what they did to, raise the youth of America, there are a few things more heroic than being a teacher. Recognizing that, these teachers go in to class every day. They have to persevere. They have to have in certain places, a certain amount of courage. They are certainly sacrificing a lot of things to be a teacher. And they are instilling values in the young men and women in this country. I tell you, I put them right at the very top of the list when it comes to heroes.
The gentleman asks, I've attended a lot of author talks, and I was wondering if you may make a comment about authors as heroes.
I think it depends on what the author is trying to convey in their work. The authors I like are ones that tell a good story, that story has got a moral, it is inspirational. Again, don't confuse achievement and success with heroism. Maybe you're a Pulitzer Prize winning author or a Nobel Prize winning author. I don't think that necessarily makes you heroic. I think instilling virtues in people with the work that you do that makes people better. Heroes make people better. You can make people better by being an author. You can make people better by being a doctor, by being an actor. Heroes make people better. That's why we value their noble qualities. If you make people worse, you're probably not a hero. So what are you writing about? If you're an author that's writing a story that's going to inspire people and make them better, yeah, I think there's some heroic value in that.
I saw on social media a post, I believe on Facebook, promoting this event, and a lot of people had written the comment, "Thank you for your service." Would you react to that remark? Because I hear sometimes maybe that is not the right thing we should be saying, and maybe there's a better thing we should be saying to heroes.
Well, one, I don't think I fit the hero category. I'll tell you that right up front. I've met a lot of heroes, and particularly heroes, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines that I've spent time with. But it's always appropriate to thank a service member, or a first responder, or a doctor, or a healthcare worker, or a teacher. You bet. I have never been put off by somebody saying thank you for your service. But I will tell you, those of us that have served will tell you that, believe me, it was an honor for us to serve. But no, I always appreciate it. And I tell you, the country has been very, very good to servicemen and women, and we appreciate it.
A couple more questions. What was your reaction to the January 6th event at the Capitol when it was revealed that some current military and retired military were involved?
Yeah, well, the military is a microcosm of America. And so, I wish there had been, frankly, I wish January 6th hadn't happened at all, but I certainly lament the fact that there were any military, either active or retired or former, involved in it. And of course, what we've done now is Secretary Lloyd Austin has put out a request for all commanders to take a look at whether or not there are extremists in their organizations. I think that is a good thing to do in general. We want to make sure that we root it out where it is growing within the military. But again, the military is a microcosm of America, and where there is extremism in America, there will be some measure of extremism in the military.
So you've served as president of a university, and you've held leadership roles in the military. Which of your military skills did you feel were important to bring over into higher education? And what higher education-based skills do you think are ideal to transfer over to the military? Very
interesting. I've heard the first part of that question before, but rarely the second part. For me, it really was about the leadership skills. And as I've told a lot of young officers, leadership skills are fungible. If you know how to lead, and by that, in the military, we think of ourselves as servant leaders. And what that means is that my job as a leader is to make you successful. It is to make sure that the men and women who work for me are given the resources they need to do the job, given the latitude to do the job. You set the standards and you hold people accountable. But it really is about making the team successful. If it ever becomes about you, you're probably not the right leader for the job. So those leadership skills, I think, transitioned very nicely when I became the Chancellor of the University of Texas system. Because leadership is leadership. I had 14 institutions. I still had to make sure that I was taking care of the students and the faculty, that I gave them, again, the resource to do the job, the latitude to do their job, held them accountable when they failed to do their job. That is leadership, and that works, I think, everywhere. The flip side of this is what I've really enjoyed about my time in higher education was the great diversity of talent. And in the military, the strength, particularly of the special operations community, was our diversity of thought. Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines, civilians of all socioeconomic background, gender orientation, etc. But when you get into higher ed, you see that, times 10. And you really begin to see the power of diversity and the power of bringing these people together to give you the best solution. So frankly, if I had to take one aspect of higher education that I saw and move it back into the military, would say, hey, let's double down on diversity in the military. It'll just make us a better military.
A couple questions. The pandemic, The pandemic has shined the light on, as you said earlier, first responders, people in the medical profession, who've really helped us turn the corner. Any other significant lessons that you observed from that you'd care to share with us?
Yeah, I think the pandemic has also shined a light on us individually as people. I mean, we applaud, and rightfully so, as you point out, the first responders and the healthcare workers and those that have really battled on the front lines of the pandemic. But I would also offer that, I've seen the goodness in the individuals, the neighbors in my community, the people in the state of Texas and elsewhere where I have traveled, helping each other out. Those that are trying to do the right thing, wearing the masks, socially distancing, that's a personal responsibility. It's a recognition that it ain't just about you. It is about you sacrificing to take care of the people around you. And you see how people have adapted in the middle of this pandemic. I mean, we wondered how we as a culture would adapt in the middle of a very challenging situation. And I think in general, people have risen to the occasion. And so, I think we, again, rightfully so, need to applaud and laud those great individuals that have been on the front lines. But I think we need to take a little bit of pride in how we have individually kind of tackled the problem as well.
And our final question comes from a gentleman who says, I have a graduating high school student this spring, and I also have a graduating college student this spring. I feel your book is full of messages to graduates. What message might you pass on?
Well, one, congratulations to that person. And the book really is, I think, designed for the millennials and the Gen Z. Those kids that are graduating from high school and college, those that are out there in the world, as entrepreneurs, as first responders joining the military, because they are going to be this century's heroes. We need them to be this century's heroes. We need them to inspire the next generation coming forward. And so I'm hoping that when they read this book, they will find a little bit of that inspiration.
Well, thank you, Admiral McRaven. Thank you, Mark Harmon, for being part of bringing out your stories. The book, again, is The Hero Code, Lessons Learned from Lives Well Lived. It is available wherever books are sold, and we have a few signed copies available in the link below. Go on gently.